Chapter 20. Rain. Well, what had he expected? Sean pulled the collar of his army-issue Gore-Tex jacket a little tighter around his neck, under the rim of his helmet. He lay on his front next to Heaton in the OP, the observation point the two of them had established beneath a gorse bush in the middle of Salisbury Plain, while Heaton scanned the area ahead and below with night vision binos. "Here," said Heaton, breaking into Sean's thoughts. He passed the binos over. "Have a goose at that." The bush clung to the top of a rise looking down into a long, shallow valley. Sean took the binoculars and jammed them hard against his eye sockets to stop the rain running into them. They had left the Matiz, the Impreza would have been far too memorable for other drivers, parked off the road between Tilshed and Chitterne. Then they had yomped the rest of the way on foot, which meant they were now about as far from the civilian world as it was possible to be in the south of England. That was where the army liked to hold its exercises. If it had been a CQR, a close-quarter recce, they'd have dug out a hole deep enough to hide them and their kit completely. But Heaton didn't want to leave any trace of where they were hiding or where the weapons would eventually be stashed, and the scattering of soil might attract attention. So, instead of digging, they had spent a couple of hours before the Army Reserve arrived carefully carving out a hollow in the centre of the gorse bush and camouflaging it. The stuff was a bitch to work with, carving out 1,000 little pricks and cuts in your hands and wrists, but when they were done, the only way you would know anyone was hiding there was if you were the person doing the hiding, or happened to stand on them by accident. But it wasn't waterproof. They didn't even have a basher, a piece of waterproof material stretched above them by clever use of bungees, paracord, and a few well-placed sticks. It could still be seen, and it was one more thing to risk leaving behind. So tonight they had to accept that Gore-Tex clothing on top of the normal kit was the only protection. Sean was already freezing. It was only 10 p.m. They would be here for a good few hours more. He was already fantasizing about long hot showers. Never mind what the rest of the platoon was getting up to that night. They were just getting back on track after Clark's death, and many of the lads had been planning a night on the town to overcompensate. Sean knew where he would rather be. "What do you see?" Heaton asked. "Rain," said Sean. "No, wait a minute. Over there on the right. Yep. More rain. Fuck me, mate. I think it's raining." "Don't be a dick." Sean kept staring through the binoculars. The thing they were looking at was a fair distance away, about 1 kilometre, but there was enough movement to make it visible even through the rain. Despite the relentless downpour, moonlight was streaming across the land. Somehow the moon had positioned itself in the one clear area of sky. It gave the evening an odd feel. The rain came down in stair rods, almost glowing under the lunar gaze, and beneath it all, small figures were moving. "They're in for a properly shit weekend," Sean said. He watched the reservists busying themselves with trench digging. And even though these were the guys they were going to rip off, he let himself feel a little sorry for them. Heaton had deliberately targeted an Army Reserve exercise for newbies. No live ammo, so they'll never get to shoot their guns, and they'll all be knackered. He'd said back in his kitchen 2 weeks earlier. And they'll be new to all this. No ex-professionals among them, other than a few of the NCOs and officers. Once they're dug in, we'll move out. The trenches won't be more than deep scrapes. They'll be working in pairs. One will be grabbing kip and the other will technically be on watch, but even he'll be half out of it. All we have to do is crawl up to some of the ones on the outside, bag our SA-80s, then disappear. Sean, like any soldier, had respect for the Army Reserve. Sure, he knew the jokes. I'd been in the reservists for 10 years, so in real life I just passed basic. But they were good-natured. The reservists made up a huge proportion of the armed forces. Even the SAS had 2 Army Reserve regiments, 21 and 23 SAS, and those who joined from Civvy Street worked their arses off to match the standards expected, and often exceeded them. But that came later. As the reservists settled into their role, the newbies down the hill might still think Army Reserve life was all weekend soldiering and a bit of pocket money. In a way, Sean reckoned he was doing them a favour. They were going to learn the hard way that someone could infiltrate them. It could get them killed one day. They wouldn't make the same mistake again. So for the next couple of hours, Sean and Heaton took turns on the binoculars while the other tried to rest as best he could. They were cammed up like Arnie in Commando, in the same kit as a reservist, so even if they got pinged, they could try and play like they were on the exercise too. Finally, with midnight slipping past and the rain easing, Heaton made his decision. Okay, let's get us some guns. As he'd been keen to point out to Sean, he had invested in half a dozen airsoft SA-80s, and they were with them now in the OP. They'd cost him just a shade over 200 quid each. Usually they would be more than that, but these ones had, well, not exactly fallen off the back of a lorry, just not got all the way from the supplier to the shop that had ordered them. And these were the ones they would swap for the real weapons. When the job was discovered, Sunday evening or Monday morning, all eyes would be focused on the stores that had supplied the weapons for the exercise. It was, Sean had to admit, just a little bit genius, but he wasn't going to say so to Heaton. Heaton gave his orders, directing unnecessarily with his hands. You go left, gesture. I'll go right, gesture. Then, when you've swapped your three out, we meet back here, gesture. So hang on, Sean said. I go left, he pointed right. Heaton scowled. Just go in the opposite direction to the hand you wank with. Oh, now I'm really confused. Oh, piss off. Heaton took 3 of the rifles and slipped out of the back of the OP, snaking through the gorse and bracken. Sean followed directly behind him with the rest. At the edge, they gave each other a final look. Heaton made a wanking gesture with finger and thumb and slid off to the right. From that point on, Sean focused on his own movements. Heaton was of no interest. Move fast, stay low, Sean told himself silently. He got behind a low rise, then was up on his feet and running at a crouch. The thump, 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 thump of his feet sounded loud enough to wake the dead. But when the rise came to an end, and he slipped back down onto his front, he was still safe. No one was alerted to his presence. Yet. Now he was within a couple of 100 metres of his targets, each scrape about 50 metres apart, and he could barely see them. The clouds had finally caught up with the moon. They were full and thick, and only the dimmest glow came through, just enough to enable Sean to navigate through the darkness. He edged forward, leopard crawl, the 3 airsoft SA-80s clamped to his chest. Cold, wet grass brushed against his face, and the smell of damp vegetation was strong in his nostrils. The first trench came up fast, and Sean paused. The sentry, the waking half of the pair, was sitting at the far end, hunched up, looking the other way and clearly not enjoying life. From his low position, Sean couldn't see into the trench, couldn't see what the other guy was doing, but he could hear gentle snores coming from ahead. He aimed his body in that direction and began to crawl again. Then a flare went off, a hiss as it fired into the sky, and a sharp crack as it exploded, flooding the small valley with white light as bright as day.